Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 17th episode of ICC Biz Live. Today we have with us Madam Konkona Sharma. She is the director, Sedona Green of UK. She is an economist from India's premier university. She is a master in public administration from US, and she's been working in the environment space for the last 10 years. Anyhow, I will not take more of your time. I would begin the conversation with us. I mean, as far as we know, business records and sustainability reporting is mandatory for India's top 1,000 companies, and it it may happen that it's a matter of 10,000 becomes 10,000. So it's important that we gain some knowledge from her, and I would not take further time. So Konkona, let us begin the conversation. I'd first request you to introduce yourself and your company in UK.
Thank you, Rajashri, and yes, thank you for the kind introduction. Hello, viewers. Thank you for your time. I know it's Friday around 5 p.m. in India, so I'll try to be as engaging as possible. I know weekend is around the corner. So, just a brief introduction. I'm Konkana Sharma. I am the founder director of a ESG consulting firm called Sedona Greens. We are based in London, but essentially we help organizations in globally, particularly in Africa and Asia, integrate ESG principles into their business operations and for financial institutions in their investment strategies. This means due diligence, impact measurement, etc. Climate risk assessment for financial institutions is an area that we focus a lot on. Personally, in my background, I'm a sustainable finance and ESG advisor. Have been working for 20 years. Actually, started my career in the Indian financial sector before moving on to strategy consulting and working with clients like USAID, UK Foreign Aid, which is now called FCDO, and over time have moved to working more closely with development financial institutions like British International Investment, FMO, Proparco, etc. And yeah, this is, I'd say, my core area of work. Let's see if I I don't know if I can call myself an expert, but yeah, that's what I've been working on for the past decades or two. Thanks, Rajeshi.
Thanks. ESG reporting in is India is known to many large corporates in India, but not, it's a very minority. They are a very minority. So before we go into what is happening in India, I would request you to since given a overview of what is happening overseas. You are doing working in this area for last was decade in based in London. So what is happening? What is happening globally in ESG reporting? What are the? We get confused. International sustainability standard boards, the task force on climate force, global reporting initiative. Isn't there a common standard system of reporting? I don't know. No, I request you to simplify for the viewers.
That is $1 million question. Is there a common system? Unfortunately, not. And the industry is like really struggling now to at least ensure that these different standards that are out there are interoperable. That means one can be used to evaluate the other. But unfortunately, that is actually a big issue right now in this ESG world. And then you have, your separate standards, principles, guidances, which also confuses people, what we call the alphabet soup. So I try to simplify as much as possible, but I don't want to presume that everybody knows why we are talking about these regulations. It is because when we talk about ESG, what does it mean? It is a framework by which you assess a company on three different pillars, right? Environment, social, and governance. In
Right.
environment, you have things like your company's carbon footprint, your energy efficiency, waste management, GHG emissions, etc. Social would be your, what steps are your companies taking to promote diversity, inclusion, employee well-being, how many, product safety, child labor, labor practices, etc. Governance is about transparency, about ensuring that you have your board is independent. What is the composition of the board? How many female board members do you have? The executive compensation practices. But these actually sound very theoretical. And what now? Okay, we know what these criteria are, but do companies actually have to report on everything? And how can they understand and measure their performance? When you say diversity, inclusion, what is the KPIs? This is where your regulations and your standards come into play, because they kind of lay out, okay, as per this particular standard, this is how you have to report. These are the KPIs, these are the indicators. And in regulations, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. Most of them are mandatory. There are few which are most of them are voluntary, sorry, and there are few which are mandatory, which I'm going to talk about briefly now. And the second thing to bear in mind is that the principles around these standards and guidances are very similar, which is why, and in fact, the BSR that you mentioned is very much based on the global reporting initiatives. Is based on TCFD. This is why understanding the global perspective is important. Um, and in this case, I think the first one that I would bring to attention is what is called the CSRD. What essentially it is a Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And this is mandated in EU since 2023. And essentially it applies to large companies and all listed companies and some non-EU companies. So there are a lot of, the devil lies in the details here. And what these companies have to do is conduct a double materiality assessment to identify the issues that are important for reporting. And what is double materiality? There are two things. One is you evaluate how your company affects the external environment. And here it means people and planet, which is the impact materiality. And the other is how the ecosystem impacts your financial returns. So that is financial materiality. So this is an important term you'll keep coming across as you do ESG reporting. And the CSRD, the main thing is it has to adhere to your ESRS. Sorry, another acronym, but this refers to European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And essentially, what it is trying to do is making sure that it is reporting for companies, even it within the scope, it might include companies who are not really based in EU, but their supply chain has offices. They have offices outside the EU domain. So, and under that, companies will have to report on environmental protection, social responsibility, labor practices, etc. So that is one key thing that we need to understand, CSRD. The other one in EU is, and I'm talking about EU because they seem to be the kind of the thought leader in this space. And UK obviously now we'll have to talk about it separately, but it's very closely linked. The other thing I mentioned is CSDDD. Sorry, again another acronym, but this is Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And this kind of has means is a mandate to the companies that they have to identify, assess, and lay out plans to mitigate, focusing on human rights. Basically, the CSDDD is focusing on human rights and environment. That is why it's corporate sustainability due diligence directive. Um, this will become legally binding in 2027. But I need to highlight here that these regulations tend to go to and fro depending on a bit of the political wave. Sometimes, they, okay, we will make it mandatory by next year. But then we see that there is some pushback, and these regulations tend to say, okay, even if it's not mandatory from next year, it will be mandatory for 2 years down the line. So it's a bit of a to and fro between the companies and the regulators themselves. So that's on the CSDD. In UK, we have one specifically for this country called Sustainability Disclosure Requirements, but this is applicable only to your UK domicile funds. The rationale behind this is there's a lot of greenwashing and products, financial products being labeled as green when they should not have been. This is why FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in UK, strongly against this, and they put in place some framework so that companies are do not mislabel their products. But that's purely for UK domicile funds that I mentioned. So these are basically the key. There's one in US also, which is SCC's climate related disclosure. But I guess given the current environment in that country, maybe we don't focus on that much now. So that's basically the lay of the land in as far as mandatory uh, reporting is required. There are some that you mentioned, TCFD, which is very climate focused, and it's mandatory in certain countries. UK, I think Switzerland, Brazil, Japan are one of the few countries that have made it mandatory. And I'm going to talk about TCFD because it's focused, it is the key one, and all financial institutions now will have to at least understand what is TCFD, which basically it was a task force on climate finance disclosure.
Right.
Uh, but the task force itself was disbanded and has now become what is called IFRS. And this comes under the International Sustainability Standards Board. But they're very similar. TCFD and IFRS S1 and S2 are very similar. It's just the nomenclature that has moved. So that's basically on your, I guess, mandatory requirements. Later on, we can talk about the India-focused ones, which is the biggest.
No, on these, what you said, two questions are occurring to me. How do this? How do you assess the impact on the environment? How much am I polluting? How much am I recycling? What way? And who is there to check whether I am complying with the standards and not? Do you carry out environment audits? That in that case, consultants like you would be flooded with work on audit and maybe on compliance. I mean, what is what is happening actually?
So in reality, depending on the audits, some audits, if you're looking at World Bank, getting World Bank projects, then those audits are quite important, and it is a growing field. In fact, if it is a mandatory regulation, then there will be audits, of course, and this is something that there are a lot of third-party auditors which is coming up recently on ESG audits, and these are the companies that specifically understand what you're reporting on and have third party verifications. Now, coming back to how do you assess what impact you have on the environment, there are different indicators. For environment, the first one that many of the companies look for is what is my GHG emission? What is my carbon emission? This is because we are all trying to move towards a low carbon or net zero rather. What is net zero? You have theoretically no carbon emissions. So that is one very definitive indicator that I've seen that companies are using. And there are different models to measure GHG emissions. There are a lot of consulting firms actually based in India who will help you measure your carbon accounting, your GHG emissions. There are models, free models like Joint Impact Model, which is one that helps you measure your emissions if you're a financial institution. And within that GHG emissions, you have if you get it very detailed, you have scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is direct measurement, scope 2 is in a way indirect, scope 2 3, which is for banks, is the emission of your portfolio. So these are the ways that you measure, one indicator of measuring your impact on the environment.
So if a bank lends it's a green hydrogen project, it will get more marks, and if it lends for a coal project, it will get less marks, like that.
Exactly. And here you come to the discussion about taxonomy, which is one that I personally am working on through a few projects. Taxonomy is nothing more than classification. In biology, you have taxonomy, right? This is how
Hmm.
species are classified. Similarly, climate finance taxonomy is basically what exactly is a green project, because what is green for according to the Indian regulation might not be tagged green in UK. And here this is where kind of um, a different Pandora's box opens up, because a more developed country will have stringent rules because they can afford to. They have already transitioned, the economy has already gone through the carbon intensive phase. Therefore, they are more strict about what is green. However, it is not fair to expect a developing country to immediately move, shut down coal operations. And therefore we have to consider that if you're investing in a product which is green, but to build that product you might have to use coal or non renewable energy sources, then can we tag it as green or not? So even the definition of green depends on the taxonomy that you are following.
Can you elaborate more on taxonomy part, because nowadays government of India is also asking opinion and all that. It's very confusing.
Yeah, I mean, it is confusing, but the best way to see it is as I said, classification. And what you have to do is go through the taxonomy of that particular country to see how they will have a what is called a technical selection criteria, and they'll have green project, you know, projects which are green, projects which are brown. These are fall under transition finance, and some sectors which are a complete no go. There are different taxonomies in the world. The ones that are kind of, I'd say, leading ones are the EU taxonomy, the MDB, multilateral development banks. They have a taxonomy. Slight difference in what they consider green and what the other one doesn't consider green. Interestingly, Bangladesh has actually published their taxonomy 2 years back, and they have a very strict implementation that timeline that by in the next 3 years, all listed financial companies in Bangladesh will have to report against those taxonomy, against those criteria, that this is my portfolio, these are the ones that are classified as green, these are the ones that are not yet green.
So if I don't meet those criteria, my export market will get affected.
Um, in terms of taxonomy, the way I would see it is yes, export market, but also the other thing to look at it is if you are a company who's looking for international institutional investment, um, in terms of impact investors, or even funding from UK DFIs, sorry, not UK, Global Development Financial Institutions, IFC, or even green climate funds, you will have to adhere to certain their taxonomy to make sure that they are confident enough to invest in you, if that makes sense for a financial institution. And if you want to be if you want to have investment from these sources.
So, can you give examples some global corporates following all these ESG reporting standards?
Actually, if you look at it, almost all MNCs, all tech companies will have a very good ESG report. But what I'd warn the audience is, don't necessarily go by the shiny, glossy report, because that doesn't necessarily translate to activities. Sorry, I'm taking a bit of a pessimistic view of this, because you will have Apple, and this I would definitely recommend. If you see Apple's ESG report, their sustainability report last year or a year back, it was basically a video clip with all the Hollywood stars. So very fancy. But yes, Apple is trying to become net zero and trying to make sure that all its suppliers are are low emissive. But that is one aspect of your ESG. What Apple is also doing is, or not just Apple, one thing to realize is all these industries, when they move to low carbon, they use batteries, and these batteries use already critical mineral resources in countries where there are less ESG standards, say some country in Africa from which these resources have to be extracted. And there's been evidence of these being of these companies, or of these mining areas using child labor. So Apple might have a glossy ESG report, but are they actually following it in their in reality along their supply chain? What in fact you should do as a company is know your sector very well and look up companies in that sector. That will make more sense than, say, an FMCG company looking at what a tech company is doing in their sustainability reporting, because the issues will be different, right?
I get. Hmm.
For FMCG, their supply chain, their labor practices, etc., would be very important. Whereas for a bank, where it is investing, financed emission part is going to be more important. So you have to do that peer analysis if you want to start doing your sustainability reporting.
So, what you're trying to say is that strategies for each company will be different, and each sector will be different.
The strategy itself, the roadmap should be similar, but what you earlier I mentioned these criteria and KPIs, right? Those KPIs will be different based on what sector you are.
Yes, yes, yes.
If that makes sense. Uh,
It makes sense.
for a oil and gas company, obviously it will be their emissions will come more from the fact that their end product is carbon emissive, right?
Right,
Similarly, for
right.
a bank, it is their portfolio. HSBC can't say, and I'm sorry, I'm using a name, but it means for all general banks. It cannot say, "Oh, my company, my office is run on renewable sources. I don't have ACs, therefore I'm not carbon emissive." But where are you investing as a financial institution? Are you investing in a coal carbon intensive industry, or are you investing in a EV product? So then you have to talk about your financed emission measurement. Similarly, for say Sainsbury, or what would be the India equivalent of a Sainsbury? Say a Reliance food mart will have to talk about how they are sourcing their groceries, what is happening along their supply chain. So the indicators will be different, but the strategy itself will be similar. And I can talk about it later on, maybe how generally we advise companies to lay out their strategy.
Now, in this context of companies and sectors, one question which is coming to me is global capability centers, which are hugely occurring, being set up in India, and they are carbon guzzlers, really carbon guzzlers. I mean, is the developed world setting, and they are big hirers and big payers also. And is the developed world wanting us to developing or emerging economies to be carbon guzzlers through this sector? But why are these centers so much carbon guzzler? I mean, what is their function? What makes them be such a big carbon guzzler? Or am I wrong? Can please give a correct picture?
So when you say global centers, did you mean factories or the
No, not factories, GCC, what global capabilities, and what some people call the cloud, what is the cloud, data storage and analysis.
uh
Why do they need so much energy, energy power, and that power can come from fossil fuel also.
Yeah, so I will not be able to comment on the actual data usage, or the power required for these data centers, which I believe is quite a lot. But what I want to focus on is important this point that you made. Why are developed countries moving their centers to what we call global south, right?
Hmm.
And that is a very it's a political debate here, which is which comes under this topic called just transition. There are few things to bear in mind here. These countries in global south generally have relatively lax standards, regulations around environmental issues. Therefore, it is easier for a global MNC to move its carbon intensive activities to global south. Secondly, and this is the topic which this comes to this point called carbon leakage, where EU says, okay, you can't have carbon emissive, you cannot be, there's a limit to how much carbon you can emit. But this regulation is not there, say in India or in Pakistan. So this company will definitely move the carbon emissive activities to these countries where regulations are relatively lax. And this is now the topic of, environment is a global issue, and who takes the blame and who has to bear the responsibility. The emissive the countries which have gone through their economic journey have already emitted a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, which is the reason for the current climate disaster. But the blame, or the people who are facing the most consequences, are the countries in the low-lying countries in Asia, in Africa, in Caribbean. That is why this topic of just transition is very important, because you need to make sure that there is shared responsibility, or rather, the developed countries, do they have more responsibility in controlling these emissions than the ones who have not emitted? Sorry, I'm going a bit off topic in
No,
terms of.
no, yeah, sorry. And also, I don't want to elaborate and don't want to make it a political one, but President Trump, they simply said he US will not follow the Paris Convention anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
how how I mean, how they can do so? Really, without making it a political debate. But I mean, can we do away with following global regulations? I mean, I don't think so. Then what's
Absolutely. And this is a question I am being asked every other country we go. But my point is that uh, is environmental the climate change that is happening, and I'm assuming everybody here in this audience understand that this climate change is happening. It's not going to change its direction because of a political situation in one country. Simply
right?
put, you are a bank in India, you have exposure to agriculture, you have to understand what is your how is that, what is the climate risk exposure that you have, given the untimely floods, untimely monsoons, possible heat waves. How is that going to affect your portfolio? So this is the work that this is how you try to translate ESG into your business operations. There's a climate risk, there's physical climate risk, and there's transitional climate risk. How does it translate to your business operations? How is it going to get affected? So this is why it comes back to the point of whether companies should uh, follow global, can get away with global regulations. My point, kind of response to that is reporting is the end part of, I guess, this journey. The first part is understanding that you are actually impacted by environmental risk, social risk, and governance risk. And what are you doing to ensure what steps are you taking as a company to build your resilience against these risks?
Very nice. Now let us come to about India part and the BRSR. There is apparently a three-layered structure: general disclosure, management and process disclosure, principle-wise performance disclosure, which is as of now mandatory for only 1,000 companies. Request to explain the BRSR in very lucid terms.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we started the discussion talking about the mandatory requirements. I just wanted to mention that there are two others, and I'm mentioning this because it's related to BRSR. Is the two other main voluntary ones. One is GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, and this is the first, I think, the first and right now the most popular global standard for sustainability reporting. If I remember correctly, around 80% of the companies report against this globally, but this is voluntary, and it's more used by organization to report its impact.
But
And
by the way, let me interrupt. Who do I report to? In India, I know. In globally, who do I report following these standards to the
yeah, good
parliament? Or
question. You have to go to their website. In all these standards, you have to the simplest way is going to the website. They'll have a join us, you become a member, and then which that being that membership requires some hoops to go through. Most of them are nominal fees or or free, and then they'll have, it's quite well, if you go to a website, they'll tell you what are the standards, what are the indicators, and they'll also have a guidance document to guide you through the process of reporting. But again, because these are voluntary, so it's up to you how you report, as in you to take out a report and you send it to the GRI as an organization. And also the main thing that companies do is tell us, oh, we report against GRI, and this is our ESG or sustainability reporting.
on the mandatory part, the voluntary part, I can make it part of my balance sheet. On the mandatory part, who do I report? Abroad, if abroad, mandatory part.
For the taxonomy, it will be your if you're reporting climate disclosures, it will be against, say, uh, for sorry, for BRSR, it's SEBI.
Let's say for UK,
Reporting,
only, UK,
sorry,
UK only. Let's say for UK
for UK,
companies.
yeah, the SDR is reporting to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority.
Okay.
TCFD, ISSB is still, I think there's still time for companies to start reporting, and that will be to the ISSB board, I suspect. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Now come back to India. Come back to the BRS report.
Yes. The other thing is obviously similar to GRI is SASB, which is Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. I don't know what sectors people are from this audience, but this is a good one if you're not a for financial institutions. A slight difference between GRI. The GRI is for most companies were different sectors. SASB is for investors. Now with India, it's an interesting thing because a couple of things I found very interesting when I look at the India landscape. One is I think India is one of the first countries, if not the only country, which has made CSR mandatory for companies. Right, that was must have been back in 2019, where 2% of your company of your profit you have to allocate for CSR initiatives. This is different from ESG, but what I'm trying to get at is once you make something mandatory as an organization, you start then thinking, okay, what do I have to report against? It's all
Yeah.
fine and dandy going, donating to CSR activities and or outsourcing it to an NGO. But then you, as a company, you start thinking of these things like KPIs, indicators, measurement. How do I keep on top of my monitoring? Which helps when you come to the your main BSR SR work. Now, the journey I would say towards formalized sustainability reporting, if you can call it that, in India, even before your business responsibility and sustainability report, actually, it was way back in early late 2000 when the MCA issued what was the guidance and guidelines for CSR voluntary reporting. And that was basically to start moving businesses towards sustainable practices, if you call it that. Then later on, 2012, SEBI, this is the start of your BRSR. Uh, 2012, SEBI started this mandate, had this mandate that top 100 companies will have to file a business responsibility report. All this
Okay.
then ended in this BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. Now, as a framework, what it says is it is aligned with the nine principles. It has nine principles on the and these principles themselves came from the earlier MCA directive. And what are these principles around? So it talks about ethical business conduct. It talks about product responsibility, which is very important about because you want to ensure that the products you are selling in the market are safe and safe for the consumers. It talks about employee welfare, human rights. There are quite a lot around environmental responsibility, stakeholder engagement. And here, stakeholders would be your big investors, small investors, and also consumers. There was a principle around fair competition. So basically, it is a framework to help companies in a way conduct business with integrity in a sustainable manner, in a fair and fair and manner which takes into account all ESG aspects. Uh, the I think that BRSR has two versions, I would say. One is comprehensive or core, and this is mandatory for all the you mentioned the thousand the obligated entities, and they
Right.
have to report against it. There is also a BRSR Lite, and this is for companies which do not yet have to report against this mandate. But I would actually here I would suggest that if there is any company here who are thinking of getting on this ESG journey, they should look at this framework. And maybe because it's not mandatory for them yet, they can start using playing around with the BRSR Lite and see how they can report against it. Because what this will do is help you in your reporting when it becomes mandatory. Uh, but also, reporting for the sake of reporting is not necessarily what we want, right? When you are talking about reporting, what you're doing is essentially an inward thinking of where your business is headed. This kind of forces you to think long term. If you see, when I go, when we say talk to banking officials, they'll be like, "Oh, there's this relatively short term, and environmental issues are long term, right?" But something like reporting against TCFD will ask you to assess climate risk, which is relatively long term. So then they'll start thinking, okay, it is not just the physical hazard, climate hazards that I'm facing right now in terms of uh, heat waves or flash floods. It is also the transition risk that I'm facing. Okay, I'm trying to move my portfolio or the economy to low carbon economy, but what about the jobs that I lose in the process or the economy will lose? How is that going to affect my company? How is that going to affect the economy, depending on where you are at the economic structure? So that transition risk is also something very important, especially for countries like India, which is why I say that reporting is just the start of your, the baseline. If you see, because you don't want to report for report's sake, you want to be ready. You want to make your organization resilient against these changes.
Uh, two questions. So one is that give some best practices of Indian corporates, which can set an example for others. And
Okay.
how is employment getting affected this what you mean is the shifting and affecting your employment, but how does if affect employment affecting affect environment? I mean, how is employment linked to environment or the area of work
Yeah,
linked
sure.
to?
So this goes back to the point I made earlier about just transition. If you think about it, when we say, okay, this coal mining business should shut down, how many people do you know that, what percentage of the economy is employed by that sector? uh, Fossil fuel, it employs a lot of people. When you're talking about moving to non-fossil fuel or renewable energy, we have to understand whether the economy is whether the workforce in the economy is equipped enough to move to that new sector, the new renewable energy sector, or whatever sustainable products that you are working on. This is more important at the government level, because, and which is why the Indian government is investing currently a lot on what are called green jobs or jobs for the future.
I
So this
get the very important point you're raising about upskilling or upgrading,
upskilling.
making
I forgot the name of the
some.
scheme in India, but there's a big one on green jobs, on upskilling, and this is where you as a company can also look at what are the initiatives by the government. And this is where the global south and north divide comes into practice, because uh, it's very difficult for a company or the Indian economy to suddenly transfer to a low carbon economy. That is why, because of these factors, because the employment and the skills that will be required for that.
the same problem which we have in IT, knowledge about AI, introduction to AI and automation, and
Yeah.
upskilling and coping, and for some the D-Day may already be there as far as AI and automation is concerned.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's our digressing. And can come elaborate on some good practices of Indian corporates, and then we will open the floor for questions.
Sure. I'm not sure I'm the best person to comment on the Indian companies which are best, but the ones that I have looked at, like Tata Steel, uh, Tata as a whole, if you remember, they have a history of doing ESG activities when it was not named as ESG. You know, these Tata villages or the Tata Nagars that were around the mining factories. It was not something that they had to do, but they did it. They earned a goodwill. They had what is called the social license to operate. So with that big history behind them, they are definitely in the forefront in terms of reporting on their sustainability work, or rather on the ESG work. That's one. Infosys has a good sustainability reporting format, and I think this is also comes from the background of some of their governance issue that they faced a decade or so back. So really, it's again, I'm hesitant to kind of pick up Indian companies as
Okay,
such,
okay, no problem.
like
So
the ones
some of the corporates whom you have actually served, if it's not too confidential.
that, well, the big ones, which are not my clients, but because they're big, everybody knows them quite well. It's about HSBC. If you come to UK from the airport, you see hordes of big ads from HSBC saying, "Okay, this is what we have done. This is how we are moving to low carbon." So these they have very good ESG reporting, but in terms of practices, it's very difficult to say, because then I'll have you have to really get the evidence. One company that I personally quite like is a apparel company called Patagonia, and
Okay.
they have a very strong ethics in terms of how they run the company, in terms of transparency, which is very important. Just the whole ethos as a company is something that I align with. And this again gets a bit very comes a little bit on the political side, because there say there's an ice cream company called Ben and Jerry in US, which I think has a very strong ESG ethos, particularly on the governance and social side, in
Okay,
terms of
now let's open the
yeah.
floor for questions. I mean, we have taken a lot of time.
I can't see any questions, but if there are any.
One question was already there.
When USA, I can see this, when USA is defying the COP agreement, how can we be listed? Absolutely, Dharma. I mean, I agree with it. I think this is something that's very passionate for me. So wherever I can in international settings, I try to push this forward. That a USA is leaving the COP or the Paris Agreement. That is one issue, definitely. But the other issue I really feel is. We have to let these economies grow or invest. The developed country keeps saying that we have not, China with its population, India with its population, and the amount of emissions they are doing right now is not sustainable. Well, when did we start our industrialization journey versus when did USA, when did Europe start its industrialization journey? So if you look at it, in fact, the GHG emission in Bangladesh, in African countries, is point what percent of the total global emissions in the world. And it is very hypocritical, I must say, of us to go and tell them, oh, let's think about your GHG emissions. So I completely agree with this question or statement.
Any more questions, viewers? Else, you can send it to our questions to us. No, no questions and no more questions as of now. Konkona, I will connect with you later, maybe for an article.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me now. And I know the timing Friday evening. So thanks, audience, for your patience. And I hope it was a bit useful.
Yeah, yeah. Don't worry. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Bye.